Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. In recent weeks, the discourse around the current health crisis is really escalating and it's getting more and more emotional on both sides. And there is a certain opinion or a certain narrative that I have heard a lot in online newspapers and also in comments online. And that is the opinion that most of the victims of the China bug are people that would have died very, very soon, let's say within a year anyway, from other causes. Another variation of that is that we shouldn't care about that because it's just old people anyway. They're old enough, they're like 70 or 80, so why should we care? That of course culminated in the meme of the boomer remover and some young people, some millennials or Zoomers who were never really loved by the tribe apparently, or who don't even have a tribe that they belong to. They actually find it funny or it gives them some pleasure to see old people die right now. I hope this is just a very vocal minority, but on social media you find a lot of comments and a lot of material like this. A statement made by a Green Party politician in Germany that is actually very mild compared to what I just mentioned led to a scandal now in the German Green Party, where the party is actually trying to kick out the politician who made such a statement. So in today's presentation, I want to talk a little bit more in detail about the problem that arises when we want to evaluate whether or not a crisis or a disease is actually very bad or not so bad. I want to present some data on diseases in general, and in the end I want to do something that I rarely do, and that is making a moral statement, talking about ethics. I normally don't really do that, but I think this time I can't get around it, unfortunately. But before we jump into the details, let me thank my audience and my supporters. If you like this material, these presentations, like, share and subscribe. And if you want to support me in what I am doing, I would appreciate a donation via PayPal, or you can support me via Patreon or Subscribestar. So I want to take the controversial statements of Boris Palmer, the Green Party mayor of the city of Tübingen, as a starting point for this discussion. Tübingen is a university town in Baden-Württemberg. It is very picturesque, but I don't like it a lot because I drive by car. And everybody who drives by car should avoid Tübingen at all costs. Seriously, don't go to Tübingen. So Boris Palmer is a mathematician in the Green Party. That is, well, I don't know if it's very rare, but let's just say in the more higher up positions of the Green Party, I would actually be surprised if they were able to do middle school math. I have to say that based on what I read about this guy, Boris Palmer is one of the few Green Party politicians that I semi-respect, and as a result he has been a controversial figure, a hated figure in his own party for a long time already actually. He might have said before, for example, that not all people are actually the same. Shocker. And that some of our guests are very criminal. And this time he said the following: I am trying to translate as best as I can in a literal way from German. We are saving perhaps people now in Germany who would be dead within half a year anyway. So I don't want to argue about the truth value of this statement for a long time. Let's just say he put a perhaps in there, which is something that I also do. See, he's a mathematician. And I would have liked it if he would have added a most of, so most of the people or many of the people. Then I wouldn't argue at all. But in this way, maybe it was a harsh statement, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily wrong what he said. And also remember, since the crisis began in Germany, we only have 7,000 victims so far. And that is just not a significant excess mortality for Germany, in other words. I am sure in other countries or in other districts or cities or states, this is different. I think in Italy or in Spain or in New Jersey or New York State, this looks differently. But he said Germany, and I think for Germany I can agree for the most part. The thing that I have the biggest problem with actually is the time span that he mentions. That is the half a year. I don't think that is necessarily true. I think a lot of these people might have lived another 5 or 10 years even without some major disease going around. A disease for which they had no immunity. Anyway, so now the scandal is here. He said that he received death threats for this statement, and even the Liberal Party has offered him that he could join them because the Green Party wants to get rid of him right now. But of course, Mr. Palmer turned down this generous offer of the Liberal Party. So what do we make of this right now? The first point I actually want to make, and this is a factual one, is that almost all diseases kill very old or weakened people or people with pre-existing conditions. This is not a special property of the China bug. If you look through the data, if you look at the online resources, you see that everything from cancer to cardiovascular disease, all that stuff kills basically very old people. So sometimes when I hear people speak about the China bug, it almost sounds like that this is the first time that a disease has a lot of very old victims. And it is not only diseases, it is any kind of ailment. It goes from dental work to knee surgery to hip replacement and also pacemakers, for example. So in other words, young people generally don't need a medical system at all. I go to the doctor once a year, I go to the dentist to have my teeth checked. Maybe I should also realize that I'm not a young man, but a middle-aged man right now, and maybe I should go to annual checkups, but I haven't done that so far. And even an annual checkup doesn't produce a lot of costs for the medical system. It actually saves it some costs because you can catch some things early. But despite of that, I have never heard that a major political movement or a larger political party actually campaigns on a platform to withhold medical treatment from old people because they're old, or that we should stop funding cancer research, or that life-saving surgery is only for people below the age of 70. Now, just to be fair here, that is really apples and oranges, because when you look at the context that these statements now were made, it was in the context of a lockdown, of course. And for all the other ailments that I have just mentioned, nobody ever suggested a lockdown of our economy or a contact ban for people. So I'm not comparing these things in that way, and maybe I should repeat my little disclaimer, because not everybody watches all my videos, of course, and I don't want to give you the wrong impression. I am not in favor of continued lockdowns, and I mentioned repeatedly that yes, I was in favor of decisive actions for a limited amount of time in March or even in February already, and I said 3 to 4 weeks tops, and then we have to open up the economy again. This is what I've said in my previous videos. You can check it out if you want to, but I'm not in favor of prolonged lockdowns. That is something that our economy cannot survive, and we will create troubles that are much worse than this disease right now. Disclaimer over. The reason why I am making this video today is the impression I get when I hear people talk about this current problem, in which they are either expressing pleasure over the death of old people, or they make it sound like that the death of an old person wouldn't be such a tragedy, and we just have to accept it without taking any measures whatsoever. But I hope we can all agree that there exists some space between doing nothing and shutting down the entire country. So now I want to talk about something that is mainly a suspicion of mine. You can't really prove that, but it is a pattern that I have observed, and I'm just putting it out there. So we all know that the majority of the people who die are old men. The ratio of approximately 60 to 40% is observable in many different countries. It seems to be a very robust result. At the same time, a lot of people are talking about ending all these restrictive measures and just lifting all these restrictions again. While I generally agree with that basic direction, especially in the case of Germany, I have to say that I am convinced that this discussion would not be had if the majority of the victims were women. We see the same pattern in many walks of life and also in medicine. When you look at breast cancer versus prostate cancer research and studies that are being conducted, it is shown one more time that men are human doings and women are human beings. I have the suspicion that most people don't really care about the death of older men, and that many people want men to die as soon as their productive years are over. That means the ideal case for a man is to have a long productive life, and then at the age of 67, when he finally retires, for example, he can die. This is a graph that is taken from a study that was conducted in New Zealand, and I show this graph many times, or sometimes at least, in my videos. It is a very interesting result. It shows the net win or gain for our fiscal system, so that means for society in general, as a function of age for the average man and the average woman. This is a cumulative graph, so that means that the positive and negative contributions from each year are summed up and the end results up to a certain age that is represented on the x-axis is shown on the y-axis. And here we can see that when people are young, they cost society, of course. Children don't work and they have medical costs, there is education costs, but then, at least for men, they break even in their mid-30s approximately, and their life remains a net financial gain for society unless they become very old. So they can become 80 years old and their life was still a net financial gain for the rest of society. But when they become older than 80 years, then, because of pensions and medical costs and so on, they start to take more out of the system than they paid into the system during their entire life as a net effect. And this is exactly why our society wants old men to just die. Because men are wealth production machines and they shouldn't live too long, because all that money is needed for the women, of course. You see that women as a group, there are of course individuals for which this isn't the case, but as a group, women never even get close to breaking even. They always stay well below the zero line. So when someone says right now we shouldn't save the lives of old people because they don't produce anything anymore and they don't pay taxes anymore, then this statement could not be made for old people. It could be made on a statistical group basis for all women. And I've never heard anybody, unless you look at very obscure parts of the internet, of course, I've never heard anybody in public, any major political group, arguing for withholding medical treatment for women. Of course, you could argue now, but women have babies and that is the reason. Well, then I would say, let's just withhold medical treatment then for all spinsters over 40 who don't have children yet. They will probably never have kids, and then you could still make the same argument. I'm not making this argument, and nobody who has any political power makes this argument, but it is a funny thing how it doesn't sound so ridiculous to some people anymore when it is about old men. So I'm not taking anything to an absurd extreme level. I'm just applying a certain way of thinking that you hear very often to all people equally. And when that way of thinking all of a sudden sounds ridiculous to some people because it is applied to a group that they haven't applied it to before, then maybe they should notice that they are being hypocrites. So now, before I conclude towards the end of this video, I want to give you a specific example. Let's consider the case of a 70-year-old man whose grandson is 5 years old right now. We have two scenarios now. In scenario A, the old man dies. In scenario B, he lives another 15 years and dies at age 85. The current life expectancy for men in Germany is 78.5 years and for women it is 33.3 years, so that is not too unrealistic. You should actually check out an older video of mine where I show that men can easily become 90 years old and there shouldn't be any mortality gap between men and women. In this older video I present the results of the cloister study. It is a more systematic approach to the revelation I had when I visited graveyards of old Catholic monasteries in Germany. You see that the gravestones of Catholic monks reveals a really long life expectancy of this group of gentlemen. But back to our example now. When a grandfather dies, when a grandson is 5 years old, what does this young man really remember of his grandfather? He maybe remembers a kind face and that he played with him and that he told him funny stories. How do things look like in scenario B though? Here the grandfather can be with his grandson until he graduates high school, until he starts an apprenticeship or his first job or he enrolls in college. He might also meet the first serious girlfriend of the young man. The grandfather can have a significant impact on the young man's life and determine or influence the path he chooses for himself in a positive way. He can serve as a positive masculine role model and tell him a lot about the past of his country and his people. These are all things you cannot do if you never get to meet your grandson, or if you die when your grandson is only 5 years old. The bond and the relationship between grandchild and grandparents is unique and invaluable, and it is fundamentally different from that between parents and children or between other relatives or friends and young people. So even if you have a strictly utilitarian worldview, you have even a value for young people and society beyond just babysitting that makes the life of the parents a little easier. But we can go even one step further. I haven't even gone there yet. But as a Christian, I have to say that all human life has a special value and it should be protected. That is the same reason for which I do not like organizations like Planned Parenthood. But the same applies to old people, of course. And it is not only Christianity that teaches that. In Buddhism, for example, it would be the same way. The fastest way to lose all respect in the eyes of a devout Buddhist is, for example, if you trash talk your ancestors or talk bad about old people. So if you don't have much time in the future in a certain situation and you want to be seen as a very, very crappy human being very, very fast by a Japanese Buddhist, for example, just do that. So to generalize and to sum up, I would say that I am seeing a lot of patterns in the discourse around this current health crisis that are just all too familiar in the Western world and especially in Germany. There is a general disregard for our elders and there are even active government policies in order to make young people hate their ancestors. They want to cut our roots and they want to make us forget that we are all related, that we are a tribe, a family, a nation in which people should care for each other and look out for each other. Once again, this should not be misunderstood as a promotion of continued lockdowns or extreme restrictive action. As I said before, these are some elements that are emerging in the discourse around this problem at the moment. And they are revealing an underlying way of thinking in some people and some groups that I find very disturbing and that I want to call out in this video. As always, I'm very much interested in how this discussion is going along in your countries. Of course, I know that different countries are hit in a very different intensity and fashion in this current crisis. So it might be another issue in other countries, but I could imagine that a similar discussion or similar thoughts and narratives are also emerging in your country. Thank you for watching until the end. Stay safe, stay healthy wherever you are. Servus, Kameraden.